Good morning and welcome to Shawnee Hills Baptist Church. We close October remembering our Lord's loyal kindness and sweet mercy. Here are today's announcements. Are you interested in becoming a member of Shawnee Hills Baptist Church? Would you just like to learn more before making a decision? We are hosting a newcomers weekend course on Saturday, November 5th from 9 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. This is a great way to get connected, and we'll provide lunch. To participate, sign up at the newcomers table in the foyer. The mayor of Jamestown is trying to replenish a benevolent fund designed to help people within the Greenview School District. And to do this, he's holding a chili cook-off supper on November 5th from 4 to 6:30 p.m., and we are hosting the event in our church building. The cost of the dinner is $10 per person, and proceeds will replenish this benevolent fund. We are in need of a couple of helpers to host our guests, and if you're interested in making a chili for the cook-off competition, please let Pastor Adam know. Copies of our proposed budget for 2023, which were distributed at our quarterly business meeting last week, are also available in the church foyer. We will host a budget question and answer session on Sunday, November 6th at 5 p.m. in case you have questions regarding the proposed budget. If you'd like to submit a question now, please contact the chair of our administrative team, Steve Golmer, or our deacon of finance, Mark McLean. A special meeting will be held on December 4th after the morning service to vote on the proposed budget. Finally, don't forget to set your clocks an hour back this Saturday as we fall back and gain an extra hour of rest.
A couple of Sundays ago, I started Sunday school for our students with a question. The question was this: what is the biggest decision that you have had to make up to this point in your life? And I love the answers because the answers, having range of students from 7th grade to 12th grade, they were quite broad, as you might expect, right? So on one hand, I had students who said, I don't think I've ever had to make a big decision in my life. To which I responded, good for you, don't get used to it. We had other students who said, I think the biggest decision was like which snack to pack for the camping trip, which is an important decision. I'll give him that. But I'm pretty sure that won't be the biggest decision they'll ever make. On the other hand, though, we had students who are getting ready to graduate and whose decisions included picking a major, picking a college, deciding how much debt to carry, right? And significant decisions that many of you sitting in this room are very much aware of. So a broad range. And why do I tell you this? Because in a second, I'm going to ask you a question. Now, the difference is you won't answer it like I get to hear all of theirs. But I expect the range of answers to be broad as well. But before I tell you what that question is, let's do a little bit of review. Last week, Pastor Adam started us in the journey through the book of Ruth, and he only went 5 verses into chapter 1. Today we will continue that. But as he highlighted and pointed out, every single word that is in there provides context as we approach the book of Ruth. So if I may summarize it a little bit for us today, especially if you were out on spring break or in fall break last week, we looked at a family from Bethlehem in Judah who is under a covenant relationship with their God, who finds themselves in famine. Again, in the context of covenant relationship with their God. And because of the famine, the head of the household decides we are going to pack up and go and head to Moab. Moab being an enemy of Israel. So again, even in those couple of verses where it's just setting, there's a lot of information that is given to us that sets up the context as we approach the book of Ruth. As they make their way over there, the two sons, so the father, 2 sons, and Naomi, they go over there, the sons find wives, and over the period of 10 years that they live there, calamity strikes. Because while they're there, Elimelech, the head of the household, dies, and his 2 sons also die, reducing the family of 6 that was there, now they're down to 3, all of them women. And that's where we come in to verse number 6. where it started with, there was a family, and it starts with Elimelech, and now there's no Elimelech. Now we kind of shift the focus on Naomi, because now it's just her and the 2 daughters-in-law, and that's where we come in. So the question that I want to ask you this morning is this: can you think of a time where you yourself were shattered a little bit, where your life, you felt like the rug was pulled from under you, and it felt like the world was spinning? Where calamity struck in such a way that you knew from that moment on your life would be different. And the reason I want you to think of that, I want us to grab that and compare our responses to Naomi's responses. Right? And as I said at the beginning, the range of answers is going to be broad, right? In this room with different people, different life stages, different ages, we're going to see different things that you might be thinking about, right? Some of you might be thinking of unexpected change of plans, or plans in which college to go to, or scholarships not coming through, loans not coming through, financial crises, death of grandparents, death of parents, death of children, failed adoptions, miscarriages, damaged relationships, broken marriages, unexpected diagnosis, right? And we could go on and on. But the reality is we can probably all think of some time that we experienced that. And I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. Because in the back of your mind, because I think many times we read the Bible and we approach it, and we approach it, we think, man, why are they missing it? How come they're not getting it? Right? We look at the people of Israel. They just crossed the Red Sea, and you're like, wait, now you're worshiping another God? How is that possible? And you feel like maybe you would make a different decision. But the reality is, most of the time, we are a lot more like them than we would like to think. And so, as we approach Naomi, as we approach her response, as we see in the 3 speeches that she gives, I want you to keep that in the back of your mind so that you can kind of say, do I relate to her at all? You might find you do. So let's look at Naomi's response, verses 6 and 7. It says, "Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah." And again, Andrew read this passage for us, and we saw her 3 speeches. And I think the 3 speeches highlight some of the things that she's experiencing, and some of her responses that she has as she's experiencing this calamity, right? So the first one is this: dismay, which I'm going to define as anxiety, sorrow, or pain that is typically caused by something unexpected. Now, this is not in what we read this morning, but this is in what we looked at last week. Right? Her life is full of loss. We start the book with loss. We start the book with them leaving what they know, their household, to go somewhere else. That is loss just to begin with, right? And then as they make their way to Moab, she continues to experiences loss of her husband, and then experiences loss of her 2 sons. So you can imagine that the pain and the sorrow that this woman is carrying with her. And some of you do not have to imagine it. You have experienced it yourself. And then, of course, the other hand is there's also an anxiety. There's also an anxiety because here you have an elderly woman, or somebody who's getting older, in a society and a culture that she needs to have a man to even own property. But her husband is not there with them. And not only that, but as she is getting older, who will take care of her? Because her 2 sons are no longer there with her either. Right? In an ideal world, she would be back. She would have her family, and as they're aging, the sons would kind of take care of the family business and the family, and they would be the ones who provide for them. But that's no longer a possibility with her. So you can see there's sorrow, of course there's pain. There's also going to be additional pain because, as we saw, she is thinking to herself, I'm going to have to part ways with Ruth and Orpah too. So not only have I lost all of the men in my family, I'm going to lose the 2 women that are still with me. And I'm going to tell them to go away. And she's preparing herself to do that as well. So you can see she has sorrow, she has pain, and there's anxiety as we enter verse number 6. And is that not how you and I react when crisis and things happen in our lives like that? Our mind just starts going all over the place. We feel the sorrow, we feel the pain, which, by the way, is normal because we live in a broken world. That is just a shared human experience. But then the anxiety kicks in, and our mind usually goes to like the worst possible outcome, does it not? We start thinking, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And it's like, and all of a sudden you are paralyzed because, what do I do? It's obviously going to go this way, which may not be the case. But in our mind, we've gone there, and that's where we're at. But we also see this second idea of isolation. And we see that specifically with all of the speeches, right? So she gives 3 speeches to her daughters-in-law. First, she tells them, return to what is familiar. Return to what you know. There are possibilities here that you won't have over there. That's what she tells them. And return to your mother's house. Return to the house of your husband. On the second speech, she argues, I have nothing to give to you. Why would you come with me? It's foolish. And then on her third speech, once Orpah has already left, she turns to Ruth and says, do you see her? Do like she did. Leave me alone. Go. Be wise like Orpah. And while I admit there are good intentions in her desire to give Ruth and Orpah as much of a future as she possibly can see, with her, like in the 3 speeches, you see there's also an insistence on her part to be left alone. And she also says at the end, I'm bitter. Like I don't want you to experience what I'm experiencing, so please leave me alone. So there's this isolation, there's this withdrawal that she is responding to this calamity with. And many times you and I do that, especially as crises tend to extend themselves, right? Because initially, we may receive an almost overwhelming amount of love and support as we enter a crisis, right? People texting you and encouraging you and cards and phone calls, right? And you feel and it like the support. But as the crisis kind of extends itself, it begins to get a little lonely because maybe you feel a little forgotten. Well, do people even remember that I'm still here? And it feels like everybody's moving on with their lives, but I'm back here. And at that point, it might become easy for you to kind of be like, well, I'll just stay back here and let everybody move on. And as a parenthesis, that might be a reminder for those of us who are not in crisis to be aware of those who have been in crisis for an extended period of time. But it's also a warning for those of us who are in the midst of that to not gravitate towards that. Because we may also have good intentions and say, well, I just don't want to burden people with with the heaviness of the situation. But in doing so, we don't realize that we're actually taking people's opportunity to be a blessing to us and to obey God's word as spelled out in Galatians, that we should be carrying each other's burdens. And so you see Naomi begin to kind of want to isolate her. Leave me alone, just go. And then we get to this last one, which I'm going to name as despair, which is the absence, the complete absence of hope. Which I think is most clearly seen in her second speech, verses 11 through 13, where she asks Ruth and Orpah, why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that may become your husbands? Answer, no. I am too old to have a husband. That's where she sees herself, right? There's no hope for me. And then she kind of lays out the cards for all of us to see, where she says, if I should say I have hope. In other words, let's pretend for a minute that I have hope, which I do not. But let's pretend for a minute. And that's when she says, let Let's pretend that I have a husband. Let's pretend that I have children. Are you going to wait for them? Which shows us two things. One, she has no hope. As far as she can see, there is nothing left for her. And two, it's also revealing where she has placed her hope, because she tells you. She said, the husband, not a thing. The sons, not a thing. That's where my hope is at, and I have none left. That's how Naomi feels. And it's easy for you and I, as we face crisis, to kind of land in that place, is it not? To say, well, I have no hope. There's nothing left for me. This is where I stay. Let me give you a little bit of a ridiculous example that illustrates this. So a couple of weeks ago, or last week, we returned from a vacation that took us to different time zones, 3 different time zones. One was 6 hours before, then 3 hours before, and then now we're here, right? Which, by the way, I would not recommend you do that with little kids. That's besides the point. So as we are coming home, we're trying to get them accustomed to this time zone. And it's not going super well, right? Our kids are struggling. Like, we put them to bed. They wake up 2 hours later, like, that was a good nap. Let's get up, right? Because that was a good nap if you were 6 hours before, but we're not there anymore. And so you get this, like, struggle. You're like, come on, just go to bed, please, right? And that's where we're at. That's where we find ourselves. So, and this past week, we're kind of working, and I remember a couple of days ago, we had put the kids to bed. We were all kind of settling down for bed. I had just prayed, Lord, please allow us to have one good night, like where we all sleep all through the night, please. And so we turned off our lights. I lay my head down on my pillow, and I'm not kidding. Like 30 seconds later, you hear, right? And you're like, come on, right? And that was my reaction. And so I get up, I go settle her, and it takes a good 5 minutes there, which is not long, but in that moment, it felt a lot longer. But so I settle her down, and then I'm like, okay, Lord, thank you. She's down. And I literally, as I'm going into my room, another one wakes up, right? And it was a little frustrating, right? And here's what's funny about it, because at that time in my heart, I start thinking, come on, God. I literally just asked you about this, right? Like, I literally just finished praying, please just give us one night. And it feels like you're not helping me, right? Like, they're both awake, and I think this one's going to go long, right? And it feels difficult. But not only that, at that point, not only am I not feeling that God is not helping me, it almost feels like he's working a little bit against me, right? Because now we have another time change coming in a week, right? And maybe that's poor planning on my part. But it felt in that instant, again, ridiculous example, because that's not a crisis. But in my heart, I started feeling, come on, God. Like, you're not helping me at all. Where are you? And in times of crisis, especially extended crisis, that is definitely a place where you and I can land. Where it feels like God not only is not helping us, he is actively against us. And let me show you, Naomi actually lands right there. Because later in that second speech, she says this, "No, my daughters," verse 13, "for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Now that phrase is very interesting because all over, it's actually used in the Old Testament in a bunch of different places. And up to this point, in Deuteronomy and Exodus, this has been used many times when the Lord raises up against an enemy of Israel to give Israel victory, okay, or to affect the enemy. And this reveals how Naomi is feeling at this point. She feels that she is herself as an enemy to God. She feels that God is not only just not blessing her, he is actively opposing her and acting against her. You can sense the despair that she's in with the words that she's saying. And as we look at this, it's easy for us to say, well, guys, come on, Ruth, don't do that. But the reality is we've all been there. And that's why I asked you to think of that crisis. Do we not respond like this in those times? And so I don't want you to, okay, let's wrap up and feel bad about ourselves. No, because what I want to show you is this. Although Naomi is feeling and experiencing this, The reality is that God, he's not against her. His hand is actually towards her. And where she feels like God is distant, he's actually been moving ever closer to her. Let me show you in the text. Let's keep moving. The first is this, and that's very simple. The idea that there's bread in the house of bread, verse number 6, how we started this passage today, right? So the fact that there is now food where there was famine is showing to us that God has not forgotten his people, but that God, in his covenant that he established, he's now bringing restoration. Right? And the text is clear that the Lord had visited his people. This is not just, oh, there's rain now. No, it's the Lord's doing. But there's more layers to this, because in verse 6, it mentions this idea. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab. Now you may say, well, why did they repeat Moab twice? They mess up? No, anytime there's repetition in Hebrew, pay attention to what it's saying, right? It's highlighting something. One, the news were important enough that travelers were kind of passing this information on, which speaks to the restoration that God is doing in Judah. But two, it's also showing that God, in his care and provision, is making sure that not only Moab hears about it, but the field where Naomi is at hears about it. So that then this plan kicks in motion. She heads back. She has no idea what the Lord is up to, but God knows. So even this fact alone shows us God has not forgotten his people. God has not forgotten this family. God has not forgotten Naomi. But there's more. God's hands is towards her in that there is chesed, or God's loyal, faithful love until now. Now it's not, again, she's not seeing it. She's not connecting the dots yet, but she herself recognizes that she has experienced chesed. She has experienced this faithful, loyal kind of love shown toward her. And this is in the first speech, where it says, may the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. That word kindly is the word chesed. So she's saying, may God show you, Ruth and Orpah, chesed as you have shown me chesed. So she may not see that it's actually coming from God, but she recognizes that she has received a loyal kind of love from these two Moabite women, who, by the way, are normally enemies of Israel. That is God's hand just graciously giving her this love, this loyalty that otherwise would have been unexpected. But that's not where it ends. There's also chesed, or faithful love, that continues and goes on. After her third speech, Ruth replies to her with a covenant that she's making, a promise that she is saying, and I think it's worth kind of breaking it apart, because there is depth to the words that she's saying. You may hear it and it may sound like you're just being repetitive, Ruth, but there is a lot of detail that we could easily miss if we just fly over it. So let's look at it. Verse 16 and 17, that she starts by saying, where you will go, I will go, which shows this idea of togetherness. She is choosing to bind herself to this older woman, when really her possibilities, her best chance of life would be at binding herself to a young husband. But she's saying no. Saying, I've counted the cost and I am going with you. Then she moves on. She says, where you lodge, I will lodge. Right? This shows this idea of commitment. She's not just going with her to make the trip and then head back home, or to make the trip and hopefully find better opportunities in Judah. That's not what she's going for. She is binding her life and saying, I am with you. I am with you. Wherever you stay, that's where I will stay. Wherever you make a home, that's where I will make a home. Wherever you pitch your tent, that's where I will pitch my tent. Because that's the love that I have for you. Let's keep moving. Your people shall be my people. This is an identity claim right here. She's saying, I am leaving my family here in Moab behind. And I am going, and I will be to the Jewish community as one of you. Like, I am renouncing to that, and I'm embracing this. And that language reminds me a lot of what I had to say when I became a citizen of this country. Part of the oath I gave was I renounce to all powers and potentates and fancy words like that just to these governments that I have sworn my allegiance to. And now, this is where it's at. And that's what she's saying. I'm leaving Moab behind and all that Moab is standing for. And I'm coming with you where you go. I'm going to skip the next part. She also says, where you die, I will die. I promise I'll come back to it. Where you die, I will die. And this shows this idea of permanence. She is going with her until the end. And by the way, in Near Eastern culture, to die away from the place where you were born or the place of your family was considered a curse or a punishment from the gods. Why? Because they understood that there were gods over certain regions, right? And so if you're born there and you died there, well, they blessed you while you were there. But if not, they didn't want you there, right? So they made sure that you wouldn't be able to be buried right there. We see it even in Old Testament stories where Joseph says, don't bury me in Egypt. Jacob does the same thing, right? And there's this understanding, like, that's a bad thing. And she's like, no, I'm going with you. And wherever you die, that's where I will die. That's where I will be buried. And then she says this, your God will be my God. And then she finishes the covenant, this promise, by saying, may the Lord, that's the word for Yahweh, may the Lord do so to me and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. So she is, I say this is also an identity claim, because not only is she renouncing to her people, she's also renouncing to whatever religion they followed. In Moab, their main god was Chemosh, and she's saying, I'm leaving all that behind. And I'm embracing Yahweh as my God. And that's significant. It's very significant because that she is showing a steadfast, loyal kind of love that should blow us all away. Why would she do that? Why would she throw away future for this? And yet in all of that, God is showing Naomi that his hand is toward her. She's giving her all these things that, unfortunately, because of where she's at and because where she's landed, she cannot connect the dots and see that all of this was God's doing. But it was. She can't see it, but it was. And the reality is when we find ourselves in those places, just like Naomi, if we land at this place that God is against me, we are at a perfect place for bitterness to grow in our hearts, which is exactly what happens in Naomi's life, and it's what we're going to look at next week. So what do we do? How do you and I prepare ourselves so that that doesn't happen? Is there anything you and I can do? Is there anything we can learn from this? I want to leave you with 3 words that I think are important, significant, and that help in that time. And it's this, one of them, review. Review God's goodness in your life up until now. Now, if you're sitting here and you've never trusted Jesus, you've never given him your life, I want to tell you something. God has already taken a huge step toward you. You may not see it, but he has. Because you and I rebelled against him. You and I, because of that, deserve a punishment that honestly we cannot pay. And so God, in his grace and his faithful love towards us, he sends his son to die the death that we deserve, to live a perfect life, to die the death that we deserve, to rise from the dead. Why? So that punishment is paid for and you and I can have a restored relationship with him. You may not know it, but that's what he did. And if you trust in Jesus, well, that's just the beginning of it, is it not? Because from the point you trusted him till now, he has been faithfully loyal to you. Steadfast love is what you have received. And you can see it in your life. You can look back and say, yep, that was God. Yep, that was God. Yep, that was God. And it's easy for us to forget about these things unless you and I are purposefully reviewing them. So review God's goodness in your life. Make it a habit to maybe every year look back. What happened this year? How did the Lord show his steadfast love to me this year? And write it down. If you're a journaling person, journal it down. Put it on your notes app. Write it on your Bible, whatever it is. But do it so that you may go back to it and see, I don't feel like God is being steadfastly loyal to me right now, but I know he has been. So review. And the next one is this: behold. Not just look in the past, look right now. Learn to pay attention to the ways that God blesses and shows his steadfast love to us in everyday life. We are training our daughters, or trying to train our daughters to do that. And we've stolen something that other families are doing because we see value in it. So anytime we're eating around the table, or eating around our kitchen bar, or eating in the car, because we do that, we ask this question: well, what is a blessing from today? Can you tell us of something? Why? Because we want in their minds to be paying attention to what God is doing every day. For them to recognize that the good things that they get is not just because they're cool, which I think they are, but the reality is that the blessings are coming from someone's hand, and it's not mine alone. It's God giving it to them. And I want them to get used to seeing that. I want them to exercise that muscle so that it's natural for them. And it's not unnatural, it's not weird, it's not like, oh, I haven't thought that ever. I want that to be normal. If your students come to our summer Bible studies, that's how we start our time. Why? And I've told them this. For that reason, I want them to get used to that. I want them for that to be so natural that it's not difficult to see God working. If you come to any accountability groups at the church, you will start that way for that exact same reason. Because when the night is dark and when we feel like God is against us, it's a lot easier to maybe squint and see his goodness when we are already used to doing that than when we've never done that before. So behold God's steadfast love in your life today. Behold that Jesus is better. Right? Like we see Ruth's loyal love and we're blown away by it. Well, let me tell you, Jesus' loyal, steadfast love is categories away from Ruth's love. That should blow you all away. Should blow us all away. Behold his goodness. Last, await. Await his redemption. Now, it's okay for you and I in the middle of crisis to say, God, please deliver me from this, because he very well might. And we pray and we ask with confidence and we bring these requests to him. But we also know that sometimes God in his infinite wisdom does not do that. He allows us to remain under the weight for maybe longer than you and I expected, or maybe even our whole lives here on earth. What do we do in those times? If the salvation is not here and we know it, then we await, because there is redemption coming. We await because he has promised that one day he will restore all things. He will make all things new, and the pain and suffering will be wiped away. And so we awaited that, and we draw strength from that. We draw hope from that fact that you and I may endure under the weight however long the Lord keeps us under it. And so I want to qualify these three things real quickly, and then with that we'll wrap up. First, you can do all of these things while experiencing pain, sorrow, grief, anxiety. I don't want you to get the idea that I'm telling you, don't feel that, that's bad. Because that's not true. Because you and I live in a broken world, we will experience this. If you haven't, you will. But what I am saying is this: don't stay with that thought, and don't let it take you to the point where you feel like God is against you. Because even in the midst of suffering and pain, you can still review and see God's goodness in your own life. You can still behold and look for things that He is still doing, even though it feels like He's not doing enough. And you most definitely can await for His redemption. And lastly, definitely do them individually, but also do them corporately. Do them corporately. This is going to help with the isolation and withdrawal part of it, right? Which is our natural tendency. Do it corporately. Learn to review God's goodness with people all the time. Like normalize those types of conversations, right? Where I see Dave Hamilton come in. Hey, Dave, how has God been good to you this week? And let's celebrate and rejoice in what He has done. Right? I love our youth group leaders because they do just that. They come to our students and like, what's going on? How has God been good to you? Which initially might be like, wait, I never thought of it that way. But I want it to be so natural that that's just normal conversation. Let me tell you how God was good to me this week. What are you seeing? How are you beholding God's steadfast love in your life right now? For those to be normal questions we ask each other. And when we are down and tired, let us together await His coming redemption. Let's pray. God, I thank You that You're good, that You're kind, that You're loving, You're persistent. Even when we don't see You being those things, or even when we feel like You're not doing enough, thank You. Give us the eyes of faith to see Your goodness when it's difficult for us to do so. Let us rejoice and celebrate in the fact that You are good and that we never lose hope because we always have Christ. In His beautiful name I pray. Amen.